Welcome to the Monday edition of the Post-Gazette Penguins podcast. I'm your host, King Jemison, coming to you a few hours before the Pens will try to push their winning streak to 7 games at home against Ottawa tonight. We're going to talk about their 6th straight win this Saturday over Mike Sullivan and the Rangers. Even though it turned out to be a close final score, the Pens won 6-5. It was a showcase for a lot of the ways that Muse has transformed the team. So we're going to talk about a few of those. But first, I want to remind you that this show is presented by FanDuel, where the Penguins are very slight minus 115 favorites against the Senators. Ottawa has also won 3 straight, including victories over Vegas and Colorado. Really all year, even though they're near the bottom of the Atlantic Division, the advanced numbers have loved them. Definitely a tough opponent at home to keep this winning streak, but an important game as the Pens try to continue to create some distance in the Metropolitan Division. Now, moving on to the win streak and the Dan Muse difference. But the day that was a celebration of the 2016 Stanley Cup title that turned into a celebration of a lot of the ways that Muse has been able to transform the Penguins, it started with some unfortunate news that Kris Letang will be out at least 4 weeks with a fracture in his foot. The timing really could not be more perfect because he could be out for a month and miss like 6 games because the Pens only play 5 games in February. But regardless, bad news for the veteran, bad news for the Penguins blue line that's already beat up. Jack St. Ivany went on injured reserve earlier in the week. Caleb Jones is still on injured reserve. Ryan Graves is still on injured reserve. And so the Pens only had, as far by my count, 6 healthy defensemen and obviously played them all on Saturday. One of those defensemen wasn't on the team until fairly recently, until a January 20th trade, and that was Ilya Solovyov. But he looks like a revelation. He was +2 again. He's been on the ice for 5 goals and has yet to be on the ice for a goal against in his 2 games with the Penguins. Also, the fact that Ryan Shea has been as good as he has been, and can play both sides is giving the Pens the versatility to survive this injury for now. That said, I do think the Letang injury makes it so that if there is going to be a trade, it makes it even more likely that trade will be to add some depth on the blue line. Listen, I don't think there's any risk of the Pens turning into a seller. They have an 89% chance to make the playoffs. According to Money Puck, they have a pretty comfortable gap on 4th in the Metro. I mean, they're currently in 2nd, but, they and the Islanders are kind of going back and forth, but they have some distance between that next tier in the Metro. I don't think they're going to turn into sellers, but I also don't think they're going to be aggressive buyers either, unless it was for a player like Jason Robertson, who can truly help you now and later. But not sure if that kind of deal is going to be possible before the deadline. The kind of deal that might be possible is to find some help on the blue line, if anything, just to show the veterans in the Pens locker room that this team is really going for it, because they might as well go for it. They look like a playoff caliber team and a team capable of winning at least one round there too. So anyways, I think the Letang injury is probably going to heighten Kyle Dubas's urgency to make a trade on the blue line, although he only has a few days to do it before the Olympic freeze. And I also think it makes his trade for Ilya Solovyov even more well-timed. I mean, he really could not have executed that more perfectly to get a defenseman in who can then fill in once you lose a guy for an extended period of time. And again, that extended period of time won't cost Letang too many games if he is able to return in that 4-week timetable, thanks to the Olympic break. So Letang did participate in their celebration of that 2016 Stanley Cup championship on Saturday. He came out in a boot, as did a whole lot of other members of that team came out who visited. It came into Pittsburgh for the weekend. Cool to see a lot of those guys. They were all over the locker room after the game. Very, very cool atmosphere to be a part of. Even Mario Lemieux came down to the locker room after the game. Marc-Andre Fleury probably got the biggest cheer of the night when he was introduced in that celebration. Mike Sullivan got a pretty big cheer as he came out from the Rangers bench and took his spot on the ice as they were recognizing the 2016 title team. Jim Rutherford returned to Pittsburgh as well and got a pretty hearty ovation. And Sidney Crosby, notably, was caught on the broadcast tearing up as he watched the video of some of the key moments from that 2016 run. A really cool and vulnerable moment from the Penguins captain. And I think just shows how much this all means to him. It's pretty cool that at 38, with everything that he's accomplished, getting to look back at some of those accomplishments still means that much to him. Now, getting into the actual game. As the Pens have done so many times this season, they pounced on the Rangers. They led 2-0 after the first period. They had a 5-1 lead 5-1 lead into the third period before the Rangers absolutely got on fire in the final 11 minutes. Scored 4 times in those last 11 minutes to make it a close game. Thankfully, Ben Kindle's empty netter with about 2.5 minutes remaining, his 4th goal in the past 3 games for the 18-year-old, gave the Pens the breathing room they needed. But they did, with 11 seconds left, the Rangers got within 1 and had an offensive zone faceoff. Noel Acciari, who had 2 goals in the game, was able to win that defensive zone faceoff for the Penguins with 4 seconds left and deny the Rangers a chance at the end. But I think the final score is deceiving because the Pens really demolished a struggling Rangers team for most of this game. If you look at the expected goals on Sport Logic, it was something like 5 to 2.23 for the Rangers. So at least in Sport Logic's eyes, the struggles were more goaltending in the final period. Don't think there's anything to be too concerned with Stuart Skinner. He has been one of the best goalies in the NHL since the break. A bad stretch of 11 minutes isn't going to change that, particularly not when it did not cost your team the game. And so here's some of the ways that I think this game against the Rangers was representative of what Dan Muse has done to transform the Penguins since taking over for now Rangers coach Mike Sullivan in the offseason. The first thing is something you usually notice right away because the Pens usually score first. They're doing so something like 60.4% of the time. That is tied for the second highest rate in the league. And it's particularly notable because they've scored first in 32 of 53 games this season. They only scored first in 33 games all season last year under Sullivan. They were second to last in the league in that mark. They were so often behind before the game had really even gotten started. And that was something that really plagued them last season. And I think it's something that speaks to Dan Muse's coaching. He has this team prepared to start these games over and over again, even amid this condensed and packed Olympic year schedule. They've outscored opponents in the first period 59-41 this year. And they did that again on Saturday, had a lead after the first period. They also were getting a lot of their offense off the rush. They had 10 rush chances compared to 5 for the Rangers. And this season, the Pens are 5th in rush chances, according to Sport Logic. They were 30th last season. So they are getting a lot more offense on the rush. They're moving faster. I think that's really helping players like Evgeny Malkin and like Anthony Mantha. Both of those guys, despite their size, are getting a lot of their offense on the rush. And the Rangers, meanwhile, at least as of Saturday, were dead last in Sport Logic's calculations of rush chances. So you could tell on Saturday how much faster the Pens were playing and how that was helping them generate easy opportunities. And then I think probably the biggest story in terms of what's changed for the Pens this season is the contributions they're getting up and down the lineup. 5 of their 6 goals on Saturday came from the third and fourth line. Now, Anthony Mantha had 2 goals. I think it's kind of hard to consider him a third liner. I mean, he spent a lot of this season on the second line, has certainly produced like a top 6 guy. I mean, he's second on the team in goals and third on the team in points after adding 2 more tallies on Saturday. But still, he is technically now a third liner. Ben Kindle had the empty netter. He's on the third line. And Noel Acciari, like I mentioned earlier, had 2 goals. He's obviously a fourth liner. And that fourth line with Connor Dewar, Blake Lizotte, Noel Acciari has 25 goals this season. They have been able to produce because they're getting the minutes. They are getting those opportunities. And all 3 of those guys have spoken about how much Dan Muse's trust in them means. I think Blake Lizotte, if you look at the minutes jump, has benefited more than anybody. He's playing about a minute more per game than he was last year. And I think particularly important, he's playing more than a minute more on the penalty kill in terms of shorthanded time per game. He's probably the team's best penalty killer. I mean, the numbers would say that he is. And just when you watch him, the activity that he has in that situation, It is an absolute asset for the Penguins. So it's crazy to me that he was only playing something like 1 minute, 19 seconds per game. That was well down the list among Penguins penalty killers. This year, he's well up over 2 minutes per game and averages some of the most shorthanded time on the team. Dan Muse recognized his ability in that area. Another thing that the Pens have done really well this year that they did again Saturday was they established permanent residence in front of the New York net. They've jumped from 22nd to 2nd in slot shots per game this season. Listen, every team wants to get more shots from the slot, but I think it says a lot about Muse's system and the way he has this team playing that they're just generating more. The numbers do not lie in that case. They're getting about 3 more slot shots per game than they were last year when they were obviously below average in the league. Now they're one of the best teams in the league. And outside of Kendall's empty netter, pretty much every one of the Pens' goals on Saturday came from in tight. Multiple came off rebound chances. That's something that Dan Muse after the game said they're doing a better job of in this winning streak. And I asked him if there was any particular reason why. He didn't necessarily have anything to add insights there, but because, it's something that, as I said, every team wants to do. But he did note that it's something that has been a part of their winning streak, that they've been getting around the net and staying there at a better efficiency than they were before. Those were some of the things that you noticed on Saturday, but there's a few more Dan Muse difference items that I think are worth looking at. One of those is the penalty kill. I mentioned Lizott's time being way up there. I think that's a big part of the stats that I'm about to share, but the Rangers penalty kill that Muse ran as an assistant coach the previous 2 seasons, it was 4th in the league across those 2 seasons. The Penguins are 5th this season after they were 18th a year ago. The Rangers have dropped to 15th without Muse. The guy cut his teeth in the coaching ranks on the penalty kill, and you've seen it in the way that the Pens have played this season. Another thing that thankfully did not come up from the Penguins' perspective on Saturday was getting goals with the goalie pulled. So they led throughout this game, did not have to worry about finding a late equalizer. But when they've needed to, they've been remarkably proficient at that. They're tied for the league lead with 7 6-on-5 goals this year. We know some of the recent ones that have at least scratched a point out of either poor performances or games where you were trailing for whatever reason. In Columbus on January 4th, again at home against Columbus on January 17th, against Tampa Bay on January 13th. I could go on. There were multiple games in recent weeks where the Pens were trailing late. They were able to force overtime, getting a goal with their goalie pulled. I would say that has to do something with coaching, and it just seems like every time that they have their net empty, they are getting chance after chance after chance and rarely allowing empty netters against. So Muse's system, his strategy in those final seconds is working really, really well. The end result is this Penguins team that was predicted to be one of the worst in the NHL is all the way up to an 89% playoff chance, according to Money Puck. If they get 4 more points this week, they have 3 games. If they can scratch 4 more points out of that would be very, very important because March is brutal. They now officially have the hardest remaining schedule in the league from this point forward. So I think that 89% chance is probably overinflating it a little bit, not taking into account how many tough games that they have coming up. 3 times against Carolina, to have to play the Avalanche twice, to have to play the Sabres, who have been unbeatable twice. They've got some tough games coming up, and I think that 89% chance might be a little too rich for my blood, but I do think this team is hurtling towards a playoff spot, and Dan Muse has a huge part to play in that. So that's going to do it for the Monday edition of the Post-Gazette Penguins podcast. You may not hear from me again this week because, unfortunately, I'm going to be attending my grandmother's funeral in Memphis. She was a wonderful lady, lived an incredible life, and my family is going to celebrate that life in Memphis. I will be covering tonight's game. I'll be covering Tuesday's game remotely against the Islanders, but then you probably won't hear from me for the rest of the week. And either way, our next episode won't be until after the Olympic break begins. 3 big games coming up first. Tonight's game against Ottawa will be the final game of Brian Rust's 3-game suspension. So imagine he'll be back in the lineup at the Islanders on Tuesday. So please like and subscribe wherever you're watching this. Please subscribe at post-gazette.com to get the best of our work. We're continuing to work extremely hard to cover all things Pittsburgh's news and sports there. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great day. And it's almost balmy today, folks. It's going to get all the way up to 26.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.